You're listening to the Business of Pharmacy podcast with me, your host, Mike Kelzer. Steve, for those that haven't come across you online, introduce yourself and tell our listeners what we're talking about today.
My name is Steve St. Onge. I head up corporate development and corporate communications at Paratech Pharmaceuticals, which is now a privately held biotechnology company. And today we're going to talk about the challenges of mergers and acquisitions in the biotech space and what we foresee on the horizon in terms of whether there'll be activity picking up or slowing down in the mergers and acquisition space in pharma in general.
Steve, break that out a bit. What do you guys do? What is your product? And what do you mean by merger? Do you mean companies would join you? And it doesn't seem like you'd want to deal with somebody else trying to make an acquisition, or you're out of the job. So what does that mean, the merger and acquisition for a company like yours?
Yeah, so Paratech has a novel tetracycline compound, an IV and oral called Nuzyra. It's FDA approved for the treatment of community-acquired bacterial pneumonia and acute bacterial skin and skin structure infections. The product was approved in October of 2018, so over 5 years now, and we launched the product in February of 2019. We've been incredibly successful in our launch of the product, and we see it as one of the most successful antibiotic launches of the last decade. However, as a single product company, there are challenges in today's interest rate environment, being a single product company who needs to raise additional funding to support operations. And so there have been, you've probably seen a number of mergers and acquisitions in the last year, smaller companies being bought up by bigger pharma. The Pfizers, the J&Js, the Novartises of the world have been quite active in M&A in the last 18 to 24 months. And that's really as a result of companies on the smaller or middle size having difficulty raising the capital that they need to continue operating in this environment. Similar to what home buyers have gone through in the last 12 to 18 months, the interest rate environment is no different for biotech.
Your company has one product, and you either want to attract maybe somebody else that has a product like yours, so now you have two products, or you keep the welcome door open for some of these bigger companies that might buy you guys, merge, and then bring your product into them.
It's what we call the buy side and the sell side. So the buy side is where a company is actively going out and exploring additional products, either commercial stage already on the market or development stage products to add to their portfolio. This is one of the important factors in terms of setting a corporate strategy, kind of the, what do you want to be in 5 to 10 years as a company? And so for single product companies, it's difficult in the long term to make it financially viable to build a wide-ranging infrastructure across all the functions: manufacturing, regulatory, legal, finance, commercial, marketing, and to continue to support all of that with a single product. So many companies look to diversify. So for Paratech, we've been in the infectious disease space. And so ideally for us to go out and find another antibiotic or antifungal that matches the profile of the healthcare providers that we're currently selling our existing product to makes a lot of sense, because you would add additional revenue to the top line without incurring significant operating expenses to support a second product. And that is certainly very beneficial from the investors. So previously, Paratech was a publicly traded company. And so we have a fiduciary obligation to do what's in the best interest of our shareholders. But it's not just commercial stage products that we look at. We also look at development stage products as well. Companies oftentimes are fully integrated from very early stages of preclinical development all the way through commercialization. So that allows them to look at very early phase 1 pre-IND products all the way through phase 2, phase 3, as well as NDA ready or commercially approved products. But usually from the top down, from the board level down, from the leadership level down, there's a corporate strategy around, okay, what makes sense next? Now, if you're a 5 or 6 product commercial portfolio company and you have the resources to take on earlier stage development, that probably makes a lot of sense to diversify your portfolio, because you may have products that are nearing the end of their exclusivity or going to be coming off patent. You want to have some pipeline assets of your own that can go and fill that void. Alternatively, if you don't have pipeline assets of your own that can fill that void, you could go out and acquire other commercial stage compounds that maybe have 8, 10, 12 years of regulatory exclusivity or IP life left to fill that void. So it really all depends in terms of what a company can afford and the in-house capabilities that a company has to execute on those various stages of drug development. But there certainly are times when we are approached by other larger companies who are looking to do those same things, to diversify their portfolio, add to their portfolio, and they may express interest in buying the company as well. So we call that sell side. Now, sometimes that inbound interest is totally proactive from the interested buyer. Sometimes it's reactive. So there are, I would say in the last 18 to 24 months, there have been an increased number of biotech, biopharma companies that are trading below cash or have had to go out and potentially raise significant amounts of equity capital in order to continue funding their ongoing operations. And with the market environment that we've seen across the last few years, in many instances, it made some of those companies with near-term capital needs, made a lot of sense for them to explore other strategic alternatives for their company, including the sale of or merger into another entity with a larger balance sheet that could support their operations ongoing. So that's really the difference between buy side and sell side mergers and acquisitions in the biotech space.
And I think you said, Steve, you guys, if you merge, it might not be this product we're merging. It might be you're buying some stage of that, some early stage of something. So it might not always be someone merged with you and now we have two products. It could be anywhere in that development of the drug.
It could be, yes. It doesn't always have to be a whole company merger and acquisition. There can oftentimes be licensing where you will take a single product. So say the target company has 5 products. You're truly only interested in one. Instead of doing a whole company merger and acquisition, you would simply license the rights for a single product from their portfolio. And we see that quite commonly in the pharma space as well.
It seems to me that if I invent a product in the garage, figuratively, some Amazon or some Apple thing or something like that, it seems that I could make it into a company closer to maybe what you guys are, or right off the bat, I could try to sell it to a company like you. So there's people that are maybe offering things up that aren't even a drug company yet, more like a researcher kind of thing.
Yeah, that does happen from time to time. We actually get a fair amount of inbound interest from large researching universities that have very early stage technologies that are interested in licensing those out to pharma companies that have more robust clinical experience and expertise in moving those assets from very early stage discovery into the clinic. So historically, your large academic institutions don't get too involved in the clinical studies. Now, they may have a very strong expertise in early stage development, but then look to license those products to more capable entities like ourselves. And typically the way those types of deals would be structured is there may be a small licensing fee, but then the university or academic center would be entitled to a royalty on net sales should that product eventually be approved, commercialized, et cetera. And then there's usually some other development milestones along the way. So there may be a development milestone for successful phase 2 results or a development milestone for FDA approval. So that's very common as well.
I always think, Steve, it always seems to me like, let's think about Top Gun pilots, okay? I've always thought that it was always really official conversation between, let's say, the 2 pilots on a team, or let's say the back pilot and the front pilot in a plane. And I always thought it was going to be all this official vernacular between these guys. But sometimes it's just as simple as, hey, Bob, the guy's over there. Turn your head and look at him. Or in a football huddle, I always think it's like real official stuff. But sometimes it's like our 5th graders playing outside at our school on the blacktop. It's like, hey, Ricky, you go that way. And Brian, you go that way. Sometimes it's just common stuff. So when you approach one of these people or a company approaches you, Is it as simple as, hey, you guys got a pretty cool thing going there, let's talk? Or before you even do that, is there more of a database or something official? How do any of those first conversations even take place?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So in the biotech M&A space, really relationships are everything. And having those relationships with, it could be investment banking, financial advisors, it could be a company's legal counsel. Those are really where a lot of these conversations start. So I may get a call from an investment banker that's representing company X and tells me, hey, the company X is exploring strategic options. We believe it's a really good fit given your current portfolio and your corporate strategy. Would you be interested in having a discussion with them about the current state of their business? That's not uncommon. Sometimes it's public company boards are quite powerful, and there's a lot of connections there amongst board members. So sometimes it will be board member to board member crosstalk that gets things going. And then eventually that trickles down to the leadership team who puts together a small group that may go and do some homework on company X first before they decide, hey, yeah, let's give them a ring and see if they're interested in getting together. So that's, I would say, between the board and between just other connections and general corporate development and banking, that's probably where 2/3 of all these conversations initiate.
So not only might it not be official, quite often it's probably not. It's probably just sitting watching a game or something and they say, hey, we got this going on, or they have that going on. It's probably between two just almost casual conversations.
Yeah. And most pharma companies have a corporate development or business development team. Their remit is really to keep an eye on the competitive landscape and understand what opportunities might be out there that would fit within the portfolio strategy or pipeline expansion strategy. And so many times, like I said, these inbound interests to a company such as ours can be entirely unsolicited. It's not uncommon for big pharma to approach small biotech proactively and say, we've done a bit of work on you. We're interested in learning more. So that's, again, there's a multitude of different avenues in which we explore potential options, but there typically is a team that their specific remit is go out and find products or companies that will allow us to execute on our growth strategy.
What's your personal biggest letdown of your job? Is it maybe not talking to someone you think should be reaching out to you, or you're getting along with a deal and somebody drops out? What are some of those frustrating times in your position?
Yeah, biotech M&A is not for the faint of heart. It takes an iron stomach like no other. And yeah, I often say you have to, especially in this business, you have to kiss a lot of frogs before you find a prince. And as a deal team, you may look at 50 to 100 opportunities before you even think one is worthwhile bringing forward to your leadership team, your board, for a more formal presentation of the business case. So there's a lot of different areas to diligence across any M&A opportunity. Now, I'm a former clinician. So coming from a clinician's background, my first 7 years out of pharmacy school, clinical practice and academia, I had a lot of assumptions that a drug just gets manufactured and shows up in our pharmacy and suddenly gets dispensed to patients. What I learned when I transitioned to pharma 8 years ago, there are so many other points in the process that we as clinicians totally take for granted every day. I would say a large number of deals in the M&A space may fall through just based on the manufacturing or supply chain or something along those. It's not always dollars and cents, Mike. It's not always, is this drug safe and efficacious? It could be, how do you market this product? It could be, how do you manufacture it? It could be, well, the supply chain comes from China and that gives us issue in terms of how we operate as a company or in supply chain integrity. So there are a lot of factors to consider along the way here. And I think that's probably one of the tougher parts of the job is you can get so close to the finish line, so close that you can taste it. Only for at the 11th hour, you find a a skeleton in a closet somewhere. Your diligence team finds something that's a showstopper, and suddenly the deal is off. And that could be after months of working up an opportunity, multiple presentations to the leadership team, to the board, millions of dollars invested in your financial and legal advisors. So it's just all part of the process.
Yeah. And most of the listeners aren't really associated with that. We might have bought some property or bought a car, bought a house. There's a little bit going back and forth, but you don't have those months and months of decision whether you're going to buy the house in this neighborhood or the car. That kind of stuff just doesn't exist. But with this stuff, it's a whole nother ballgame of levels and contingencies and things like that.
Exactly.
Steve, what skill did you find lacking in yourself coming in as a pharmacist that you really didn't know it was lacking, and maybe you couldn't have done anything about it, but it was something that kind of hit you hard that I don't have this yet?
For me, it was, I think, being able to effectively read a room in M&A and in negotiations. Body language is really important. I think is something as pharmacists, we don't have that opportunity every day. We're not sitting across the table trying to hammer out a deal with someone. Like you said, we may have bought a car a few times. We may have bought a house. This is an entirely different process, and trying to create relationships with the party on the other side and finding out who the key decision makers are. Something as clinicians that are practicing pharmacists, we've never really done. So I think it took a while for me to get good instincts and read between the lines of conversations and comments. And you may come out of a meeting thinking, wow, they said all the right things and this seems really positive, but there was just something off about the body language, or there was one small comment that they made at the close of the call to suggest that, gee, maybe they're not really interested as much as we thought. So that I think was I don't want to say the hardest part for me to adjust to, but I think took the most time to just become savvy in those discussions.
I imagine going in those M&A meetings, you walk out and you're thinking like, this is done. It's not like you learned your lesson at that meeting. You didn't learn it till one of your higher ups said, well, that doesn't mean anything, Steve, just watch. And then sure enough, 2 or 3 weeks later, the kibosh comes on the whole thing. And that's probably when you learn your lesson. It's not in that initial meeting.
No, it absolutely is. And I think a mentor of mine has said it to me best. If you've seen 10,000 deals, you've seen one. Because each one of them is unique. Each has their complexities. You could get to minutes from signature pages and announcing a transaction only for the financing to fall through or the board to have some indigestion around the transaction. Every one of them is a unique experience, and it is not a cookie cutter process by any means.
And it's certainly just numbers. I've never thought of myself as a salesperson because in pharmacy, really none of us pharmacists have, especially the old farts like me. People just came in and they did their thing. But just for example, though, when I had to put my sales hat on, even like inviting people to be guests on the show when it first started, and I'd be reaching out to people, it's amazing the mathematics behind sales or the stuff you're talking about. And it truly came down to, it was 20%. I would throw out to 5 people if they wanted to be a guest on the show, and one person would accept it. So then you throw out a couple more and nothing happens. But then finally you wise up and you say, oh, I got to throw 5 of these out there. You throw out 5 and someone picks it up. It's very much the average. And so in sales and M&As, you could really get down for a big one, but you just have to, I'm sure, say to yourself, this is all part of the ball game and it's all part of the numbers. In the end, it all averages out.
Yeah, it's definitely all part of the ball game. And the more you do this, the smarter you get about it. I mean, I often think back to when I transitioned from the R&D side of pharma into corporate development. And I have to laugh because looking back at inexperienced, transactionally naive Steve, I probably wasted a lot of time with my management team and my board talking about things that were never going to go anywhere. And to your point, the hit rate was really low at first, but then as time went on, you start to understand, hey, this is a better strategy and these are all the things we need to look at. And I think the one lesson that I learned is you have to be capable and willing to engage every ounce of expertise in your organization when you're looking at one of these deals, because it is very easy to leave out a certain component you could be leaving out a $15 million expenditure on the P&L every year, and that could be what makes or breaks the deal being profitable. It could be something as simple as the drug has some type of large post-marketing commitment in pediatric studies or adult studies, something that you just missed along the way that ended up being really meaningful. So, I work with every single key stakeholder in the company. That's finance, legal, manufacturing, clinical, non-clinical. It's just amazing how much expertise you need to bring one of these things together and get it closed.
How many people do you figure that you interact with one of these sales on your side? And whether it's email or dropping by their office or something like that, how many people are you getting either input from or you're sort of reporting to before one of this stuff happens on your side?
Yeah, it's a team of about 20 of us that we're working up a deal or getting it close to the finish line. And that's just internal. That doesn't include external legal advisors, external financial advisors. When we were going through the take private transaction for Paratech, there were, I think, 19 lawyers from our outside counsel group that were working on the deal. Now, I may have only interacted with 3 or 4 of them, but behind the scenes, that group of 3 or 4 lead lawyers had a team of 14 or 15 working on this transaction. And that's just one side of the deal. That's not counting for the other side of the deal. And that's not counting for our financial advisors. So there's a lot of resources and touch points going to all this.
When you're watching a football game and someone screws up on the field, and of course, afterwards, everybody on the team is saying, well, this is a team effort and we, did our best and so on. But those guys are not having that conversation when they get back to their wives at night. They're saying, damn it, Joe did this or that. If a deal doesn't come out as good as you guys thought it would, across the board, you're going to say, well, the whole team, that's just one of the things. But in the private conversation, Steve, with the husbands or the wives, who takes the hit on this emotionally? I mean, the CEO is always going to say, well, the buck stops here. Do you take it personally if something doesn't go through, or is it truly spread out? And if it's not spread out, and if it's not you, can we throw stones at somebody?
Yeah, well, we have the mindset that most M&A actually doesn't work. I mean, 80 to 85% of these deals, even the ones that are executed, you look back on 5 years down the line, and you just think, gosh, what were we thinking strategically or organizationally here? How did we miss the long-term forecast on this? And sometimes it's things that are in your hands that you can own, and sometimes it's external factors that you just can't. Think of any company that did a significant M&A in 2019 or early 2020. They paid a premium for companies at the peak of the market and then had a external non-controllable event occur. I mean, COVID set the launches and commercialization of hundreds of biotech companies 18 to 24 to 36 months behind schedule. And some of them have been and nor ever will be able to recover. But yeah, I mean, there's the controllables and the non-controllables. And I think for the controllables, me as the head of corporate development and whoever the project champion may have been, every great M&A deal has a champion. It could be the CEO pounding the table saying, we have to get something done. We have to bring in another revenue generating product. It could be the head of R&D who really likes the science and says, look, this could be transformational for patients. This could be transformational for the company. And so there definitely is some degree of ownership, but a lot of times that time to reflect in deals that get executed is not until 3, 5, 7 years later. And those individuals may have moved on.
I think any company, anybody that does something and success is the minority, whether it's baseball player not getting hit 70% of the time, but they're good. I think of maybe comedy writing rooms for a sitcom. You've got to believe that there's maybe 50 jokes in an episode, but probably 500 were thought of during that time. I think any business or any goal that you can plan on more losses than wins is a good spot to be in. So you don't tighten down and worry so much that you're not even taking chances.
Yeah, we make a lot of assumptions in M&A in general. You can't always predict the future. I atone it to the live win percentages that you'll see in a football game or a baseball game. I mean, you could have a 2%, win rate or probability of winning rate because it's 2 outs, bottom of the ninth, and you're down by 6 runs. But that doesn't mean that you're out of the game. And that's very much what we see in M&A as well. There's definitely a lot more losses than there are victories, but sometimes it's the long shots that will come through and surprise you in the longer term. An assumption that you made worked out extremely favorable, or just a series of things worked out in your favor that allowed the transaction to be much more profitable and accretive than anybody ever thought.
I've talked to some private equity guys, and it's amazing their definition of success is way down there. I'm just going to throw out 20% have to be successful or 10% have to be successful for them to consider it a win, where you'd be thinking in your head, oh, it's 80 or 90%. They've got to get an A. They've got to be in that percentile, but pretty low percentile is out there for them to consider it a win because they know there's going to be a lot of losses. It's different for every industry.
Yeah, drug development is no different. Between 40 and 60% of all compounds that enter phase 3 don't ever make it to market, which is incredible if you think about the money that's been invested in drug development up to that point. And it's for big pharma, it's about how can we maximize our shots on goal, and having a diverse pipeline. A diverse pipeline for a big pharma is not 2 or 3 products. It's 10 or 15, knowing that half of them may not hit.
Now that's a percentage of third stage. Is there a percentage earlier? I imagine a lot more drop out earlier in the race too.
Yeah, I believe it's a 1 in 10 products that enter phase 2 end up making it to market. And obviously the earlier stages, the odds are even lower.
I don't even know what phase 1 means, but there's got to be hundreds of ideas that keep getting funneled up.
Yeah, that's exactly the path. And with each step, the amount of rigor in terms of clinical outcome and safety, efficacy, the bar keeps getting higher. And so that's why we only see 1 in 100 maybe preclinical assets that come out of academia or early stage discovery company will ever make it to see the light of day on our pharmacy shelves.
What kind of personalities do you not like to work with? Are there any personalities that just bother you?
It's the people that don't have a willingness to allow a fresh set of eyes to have a perspective. And I think this happens quite often, actually. And a lot of companies have long time legacy knowledge and a pound the table mentality that this is the way we've always done it, and that's the way it's going to be. And that's where I say that attitude trumps experience 8 days a week. I would rather have a self-starter entrepreneurial mindset that is solutions oriented, go in and figure out how can we fix an asset? How can we fix a company? How can we fix a product to make it more successful? Because I'll promise you that nobody wants to call their own baby ugly. And when you've worked on a certain project, asset, or company for so long, I mean, we tend to have this tunnel vision mentality. And I'm a firm believer that there's never a monopoly on good ideas. They can generate from anywhere in your organization. It doesn't have to be from senior level individuals. Sometimes it's the most inexperienced people that actually have the best ideas because their well hasn't been muddied by necessarily try and fail in the past. And so they're a little bit more innovative with their approach. But yeah, that's the mentality that bugs me the most, is the one that the 25 years of experience and I know how to do it, and we're not welcome to a fresh set of eyes giving us a perspective here.
My wife always complains that I'm so skeptical about things. She'll say something and I'll be at dinner. I'll have my phone down on my lap. I'm looking it up just to see if she's right or not. And she does it to me too, but I don't call her out on that all the time. But one of our guests, we were talking that pharmacists by our nature, we're trained really to find the negative, to find the problem, to not let something go through us. Nobody congratulates us when we authorize something, that's our job to find problems. So I tried to explain that to my wife and how right that comment was, but.
Well, I think that it was actually a shift in mindset for me too, coming from clinical practice, where there's a lot of black and white in what we do. There's not always a tremendous amount of gray area. And I agree with you. I think as scientists and clinicians, we're trained to, it's either a decision to move forward or not. It's a very binary decision point in most of the ways that we practice. So I'll give you an example. When I used to look at development stage products, I would think about, okay, what's the likelihood that this product gets approved? And let's say it's one that has positive phase 3 data. It's maybe a 75% likelihood. I mean, I would used to look at the 25% of, okay, why is this product going to fail and what risk does this put against the organization? I think my mindset now is to be more solutions oriented. Okay, we can still take a look at that 25%, but if we acquire the product, and even if we got the no from the FDA, we got a complete response letter, what would it take for us to fix it? Is it a simple manufacturing issue that can be solved with a $500,000 or $1 million expenditure? Or is it a more complex problem that would require another $50 or $60 million phase 3 investment in a follow-on study? So I think that's the mindset that when you're a deal maker, you have to think, how do we get this to work? And kind of work backwards from there.
And if it was so easy, maybe everybody would be doing it, and then you couldn't compete with supply and demand and all that stuff. So there has to be calculated risks going on.
Yeah, not every company has a checkbook like Big Pharma. We don't have the checkbook of the Pfizers and the J&Js of the world. For small and mid-sized companies that are trying to do corporate development, our budgets are forcing us to look at a product that may have a wart or two on it. And for us to figure out, okay, it may not be $1 billion product, but you know what, Mike? At the end of the day, that's okay. Because every product that gets to market doesn't have to be $1 billion product to be successful.
Steve, I'm not bragging at all here, but I got a number of kids and our company's got a couple cars for delivery, or now we have one. But at one point, I had 9 cars that I had to get for a number of my kids and a couple at the pharmacy. Now, the total value of those 9 cars was like $18,000. I mean, these are like $2,000 cars. Not anymore. Now a $2,000 car is like $8,000 car, especially with the strikes and stuff going on. But I always asked my wife, I'm like, where's the good rust spot, or where's this or that? Because that narrows out the people that are buying those cars. So I want to see some of those warts on things that I can live with, that I know is going to be a decent enough deal for me.
Yeah. And some companies, their strategy is they will pay a premium for products that are de-risked. So to take some of that uncertainty out of it. So some of the private equity groups function like that, actually, that are looking to acquire biotech companies. They focus on de-risked programs. They don't always entertain a lot of earlier stage clinical development risk, but with that, they are willing to pay a premium. I think about my mindset, I'm also a residential real estate investor, and my strategy is to buy and hold those properties. Well, because most of the properties that I hold are 700, 800 miles away from where I live now, I'm willing to pay a premium for something that is turnkey, that I'm not going to have to sink a bunch of time or money into it in the near term. So some of the corporate strategies in biotech and M&A are no different.
Have you seen these 1-unit apartments in New York? It's those real tall and they're so skinny. I forget the ratio. What is it like? What's the ratio they use? Like 1:24? Maybe that's rise versus run kind of thing, like how wide versus tall.
Yeah.
And there's people, I understand, that buy these as investments without even going into them, because here's what they can do. If you've got one of those units, and for the listeners, each story is a full apartment only. There's only one apartment per story. What they like about those is when you lock the door, there's nobody that can enter that. There's nobody that can even be in your hallway or doing anything unless they were Spider-Man that went up your window and did something like that. So there's a case there. You want to de-risk them and not have that thought, the less control you have over it. I know, Steve, you're a PharmD and you have your MBA.
That's right.
Do people ever try to use that against you, that you're a pharmacist? Do they ever say, well, that's your attitude, you're black and white because you have the pharmacy degree? I don't imagine that would be the case, but do you ever consider that a negative?
So I think there's certain perspectives. I would just say overall on the industry side of healthcare, that us as PharmDs, we're conscious about just dollars and cents when it comes to medications. And I think this is actually a more chronic systemic problem that has forced the general public or even really smart people in industry to think that pharmacists are trained to operate just that way, just fiscally. But if you think about the metrics that hospitals hold pharmacists accountable for, because we're an infectious disease company, I'll take antibiotics as an example. Antibiotic stewardship and antimicrobial resistance are really hot topics. And at the end of the day, we should be prescribing the safest and most efficacious therapies for our patients. If your mom was on a ventilator and got a pneumonia, would you want to start with a novel, safe, well-tolerated drug, or would you want to start with one that was 20 years old? I think that the answer is quite simple. But the way that infectious disease doctors are held to the same standard too by hospital administrators, that what matters at the end of the day is how much money came out of your antibiotic drug budget. Those clinicians are not necessarily, and particularly pharmacists that are infectious disease trained, are bound to the dollars and cents. They're not evaluated on how did your patients do, Mike? Were your outcomes better? Did you use a drug that resulted in less serious side effects, less C. diff infections, et cetera? I know it's a minority of infectious disease pharmacists in this country that I know that are held to that quality standard, that are not held to the financial standard. Because we're held to that standard, that's the way we almost have to operate in principle, in practice. And I think some of that carries over into industry's perception of what the role of the PharmD is in healthcare in general. And we certainly see it with PBMs as well. When a prescriber submits a prior auth for a more novel medication, and it goes to a DUR review, who's the key gatekeeper there? It's usually a PharmD. And at the end of the day, it may be a step edit or sequential therapy failure that has to occur in order for the more novel, expensive product to be dispensed. And so I think from that view, pharmacists are seen as only focused on costs and not necessarily outcomes. So I'll say I think that's the one thing that we do face in industry with a PharmD degree. That is an interesting perspective. I will tell you that when I went back to just turning the table here, when I went back to get my MBA, folks at the time asked me, well, what are you going to do with this? Why would you go back and get an MBA? I'd been out of school for 6 or 7 years, and I did it when I first came to industry because it quickly, I came to the realization that a business mindset, and I already had it, but I didn't necessarily have the credentials that supported it. That the business mindset in an MBA would open a lot more doors that would close for me at some point in my career. And I didn't know what that point in my career was going to be. Fortunately for me, it was pretty quick, but I look back on it as there was never really one aha moment in business school where I said, gosh, golly, I'm going to take that piece and use it to conquer the world. I think if you encapsulate it all together with your real world work experience, I think it added a lot of value to the growth of my career. And I will say in a corporate development role, the nice part about having a PharmD credential as well is you always think about things from the perspective of the clinician as well, which is really important in drug development because we could have the best technology that saves the most lives and is really well tolerated. But at the end of the day, if there's not a place for it in a clinician's paradigm, then we're just throwing good money after bad. So I think that's a really important perspective from corporate development, is just understanding, especially with pre-approval products, like where exactly would this fit in the treatment paradigm? And is there truly an unmet medical need that patients and providers have out there? Because let's face it, in today's day and age, a lot of the new drug approvals that we're seeing are Me Too products that don't have a lot of incremental benefits in therapy over the gold standard. I think for a long time, we thought in fields like oncology, is ones where there was constantly just mind-shattering innovation going on. And I think there still is to some degree. But I think that innovation curve is slowing down a little because there's only so much that we have to improve on over what are existing gold standards of therapy.
I can almost see being around like a boardroom and you've got some, let's say, marketing gal with the big Harry Carey, thick black glass rims, you know, the type, kind of sounds like a smoker. And they're like, well, Steve, you don't have a big enough picture because you're a pharmacist and you kind of got that clinical stuff, but you got to dream a little bigger, you know. And let's say somebody else says, you got to take chances. That has nothing to do with it. I'm just thinking about this. I can almost see someone pulling that on somebody as a detrimental thing.
Yeah, I think, again, it's the mindset that as scientists, we're trained to think about what could go wrong in this scenario. Whereas our commercial colleagues, they usually 98% of the time they mean well. I don't think most people don't get out of bed in the morning with poor intentions. But I think, again, it's the way that our minds are trained. And I think, a lot of my closest colleagues are on the commercial side of our organization. And when we do some of these, like the Myers-Briggs tests and others, the way that my brain functions is always at a different, completely opposite end of the spectrum from a lot of my commercial colleagues. But you know what? At the end of the day, I think it's okay. It's okay. It's okay to have differing perspectives because in what I do for a living, they all need to be balanced out.
Steve, you mentioned that it's kind of maybe inching towards similarity without any new information or ideas in our heads. Does that help mergers? Does it hurt mergers with that kind of thought pattern that some things are maybe saturated?
Yeah, so I definitely think it hurts the mergers and acquisition space tremendously with a lack of innovation. And not to say that we're there by any means yet, but I think in certain therapeutic areas, we're approaching that point of saturation because at the end of the day, each company has a corporate strategy. And I can promise you that the corporate strategy is not to bring in products that don't offer incremental benefit over those that maybe have the lead market share in the market. It's how can we go out and beat the competition? So I think that is challenging the amount of near-term M&A. I think the other complex factor, which you talked about a little bit earlier, Mike, is the interest rate environment today. So when companies go out and do any size transactions, a large portion of the time, it's not at all cash consideration. They need to leverage some debt against this to complete the transaction. And in what is an interest rate environment of 10, 11, 13% for biotech straight debt deals, that makes M&A that much more expensive. And so I think right now we've seen the last couple months, we've seen a lot of slowdown. There's still a lot of uncertainty about inflation. There's still a lot of uncertainty about where interest rates are going to go. And I think that's left a lot of money on the sidelines in biotech M&A. There's clearly been a slowdown in the second half of the third quarter, and I think will continue into the fourth quarter and until we get some more clarity, and even into next year, until we get some more clarity about what the interest rate environment is going to look like going forward. With that being said, I think that there are a lot more opportunities out there for buyers that are using all cash and not leveraging financing to get some really good deals. Because at the end of the day, if you are currently a non-revenue generating or unprofitable company that needs to go and raise additional equity capital to continue your operations, you're having to do it at pretty punitive prices. And I think that offers some opportunity for some good deals to be had for folks that are out there ready to buy with cash. Not dissimilar to what we saw back in the 2007, 2008 real estate market. We saw a lot of folks that were sitting on cash, patiently waiting, and were able to scoop up things for really good value and turn around and flip them 5 to 6 years later. I think that there will be a good amount of that here in the next 6 to 9 months to come.
I got some friends that are building a house, and I remind them that my dad built our family home when I was a freshman in high school. It was during the Carter years, and I want to say, Steve, it was 17% home loan. So I guess things can get worse.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. Back in the 80s, people took out mortgages and paid them off like their hair was on fire. And I think, look, for us in biotech, we were in a near zero interest rate environment for a long period of time. And companies spent it like they had it. And they had it to some degree, but not entirely. And I think what you've seen in this interest rate environment is companies being a lot more prescriptive in terms of how they're going to prioritize their portfolios, especially their development stage compounds. You've seen like announcements recently, Johnson & Johnson is moving away from the infectious disease and vaccine business entirely. And that includes both their commercial as well as development business in that space. So you've seen a lot of that type of prioritization as capital has gotten more expensive here.
Steve, thanks for spending time with us. Very cool to hear this from somebody who's a clinician, been through that, and then shifted over to this and merging those two. So thanks for spending time with us.
No, thanks, Mike. It was a pleasure being on, and hopefully the listeners enjoy this. And if it challenges one person to think creatively about a non-traditional career path, then I'll have achieved my goal for today.
Absolutely. All right, Steve, we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. You've been listening to the Business of Pharmacy podcast with me, your host, Mike Kelzer. Please subscribe for all future episodes.